One of the interconnections in Western Hermetic tradition is between spirituality and science. This linkage goes back to the practices of the medieval alchemists, which transitioned to the beginnings of modern chemistry and physics. As a person versed in Masonic tradition, as well as a pioneering radio engineer, John Fetzer came to have a deep intuitive understanding of this linkage. In this part of our interview with Grandmaster Akram Elias in Washington, D.C., Akram discusses how John Fetzer's views in this regard were congruent with, and in fact influenced by, those of Freemasonry, starting with the Masonic concept of the connection between the conscious and subconscious minds and the spiritual world, and moving on to Fetzer's notions of love as infinite energy, of the mystical side of physics, and of integrating spiritual mindfulness into science, and of the relationship of the experimenter with his experiments. After interviewing Akram on this subject, we go with him to the Albert Einstein statue in D.C. outside the National Academy of Sciences building, and to the National Cathedral's Science and Spirituality windows. So, we begin with the sit-down portion, with Akram discussing the dual pursuits of science and spirituality.
The pursuit of scientific knowledge, disinterested. In other words, not clouded by politics, not clouded by extreme views, the pursuit of scientific discovery, knowledge, and understanding the laws of nature. And on the one hand, on the other hand, connecting with one's spirituality through the subconscious. They go hand in hand. They're not contradictory. This is where we find that they're really coming together. And unless we do both, that point of equilibrium, which is at the heart of harmony in this universe, would be missed. As simple as that. So
science has to be pursued as a spiritual path.
Absolutely. What unfortunately quite often happens, politics get involved and try to put blindfolds for scientific scientific research, the spiritual pursuit of science. Often governments, politicians, religious leaders, even civic leaders, intentionally, unintentionally, out of ignorance, out of superstition, out of whatever it is, they try to. But if you free it, you find they're hand in hand. There's no contradiction here. Absolutely not.
So it's that idea of disinterested wisdom or disinterested science that forms a part of that ritual.
And this is where part of the whole idea of freedom is lack of control. See, whenever people try to control, that's when we get in trouble. Behind the idea of enlightened freedom is you're unleashing energies. Don't try to control. Just unleash, let things happen. And the more you connect with the subconscious, with the divine, the more you will be able to navigate through. But if you try to control with your conscious mind, this is when you always fail.
And doesn't it involve receptivity as well?
Yes.
The control then blocks out receptivity, and opening the subconscious is all about, it's about energy and focus, but it's also receptivity.
Then this is going back to the sun and the moon. The moon is the receptive side, and the sun does not project power. It diffuses light. So there's a very important distinction to be made between projecting power and diffusing power. So diffusing power has no control. Projecting is when you're trying to control, and you automatically block the receptive side, and you ultimately shoot yourself in the foot, ultimately. And that's at the heart of the same concept of enlightened freedom. You have to relinquish the idea of controlling.
That enables you to invoke the goddess or
the blessing of deity. Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's the notion of providence too, right? That you basically follow the will of providence. Yeah.
And the word providence you'll hear all the time.
Well, Washington, he never talked about God. He always talked about providence. Yeah. Just kind of a blueprint, kind of a map, if you will, a structure. Yeah.
Which explains to you why we emphasize in Freemasonry the word trust rather than believe when it comes to the providence, the deity, which made it even on the currency, in God we trust, and God here meaning supreme being, that supreme intelligence, supreme, but trust. It's a conscience, it is a free choice. If I say, I trust you, Brian, nobody forces me to trust you. But I can believe in something because my parents taught me to believe in that, and I grew up believing in something. Trust is a free, intelligent choice. So this trust in providence is a free, intelligent choice and should never be imposed on others, therefore not controlled.
But it's also based on evidence too. It's not simply a faith position, it's something that's trustworthy. Yeah.
Akram, we've got a few more questions here regarding science and spirituality. In 1986, John Fetzer did a talk with the communications director at the Fetzer Institute. It was called A Talk with John Fetzer. And one of the things he stated was, quote, "Suffice it to say, I have long held the view that energy scientific research that is not accompanied by spirit is suspect. I must tell you I was greatly fortified in my viewpoint when I read the following quote from Einstein. Quote, the most beautiful and most profound emotion we can experience is the mystical. It is the source of all true science." So Akram, previously you told us that Freemasonry is interested in the science and the arts. And but John Fetzer, of course, was a radio engineer, so his focus was, his context was science. So the question is, what sense are these notions, linking science and spirituality, a continuation or perhaps an extension of Masonic philosophy? Can you comment further in the context of these statements that Mr. Fetzer wrote in the late 80s, mostly in the mid to late 80s?
The second degree of Freemasonry, which is titled the Fellow Craft, the Fellow of the Craft, that is now you're an actual builder, first degree being an apprentice. The second degree, everything is based around geometry. The person is, the Mason is encouraged to pursue the knowledge in the 7 liberal arts and sciences, but he's told that the 5th one of the 7, geometry, is of particular importance to this degree. The initial of geometry is the letter G, and that explains to you why in the universal symbol of Freemasonry, you see the compasses, the square, and often the letter G. Now, most people think G is the initial of God. G stands for geometrician. So we, in Freemasonry, we refer to the creative force, to that infinite intelligence, supreme being. People can define it in many different ways, but it's basically the universal truth as the grand geometrician. So we use geometry, and we're preparing the Mason in the 2nd degree before he ascends to the 3rd, which is purely the spiritual. In geometry, geometry brings 2 things together. This is why it's so important in Masonry. Science, it is a scientific knowledge by studying the laws of nature. And my most favorite lecture in the 3 degrees of the rituals, or the 3 degrees of Freemasonry, is called the G lecture, urging the Mason to study the laws of nature. Everything is based on reason and the scientific method. This is very important. However, it is not only about science in its pure form. It has to have beauty with it, because science can be used to do ugly things. Science is a tool that humans have developed to discover to uncover truths of this universe, to understand laws of nature. But how they choose then to apply parts of those laws of nature can be to create some ugly stuff or some beautiful stuff. This is why we like geometry, because it brings to reason the concept of beauty, which is symbolized in the order hierarchy in the lodge, in the third pillar, which is the junior warden. We call it the pillar of beauty. So when now you bring beauty, beauty makes us use reason to do beautiful things. And this is to help the Mason prepare himself to the third degree, which is the spiritual. That is, really these two are an emanation. Science, reason, and beauty emanate from the spirit, and which to the Mason who really digs deep into the esoteric aspects of the ritual means love. Love, from love, there is the power to create, to build, and to do it in a beautiful way, not in a hateful, negative way. So love is at the heart, and that is why the Mason in the beginning, not the Mason, the candidate to the degrees is asked a very important question. Where are you first prepared to become a Mason? And says, in my heart. Now we use that exoterically, the heart. Esoterically, we mean we associate it with love. That is, it is the seeking love, because love is an attraction, is the reason why you knock at the door. And you're going to ultimately understand that it is really through love, with love, that you can build, fight superstition, fight ignorance, promote the betterment of humanity, but at the same time beautify humanity.
Very good.
Can we talk a little bit more about geometry and the importance in Masonry? Geometry seems to be kind of symbolic of all sciences within Freemasonry, but it's an interesting connection between both science and religion, because as you were saying before, geometry is an axiomatic science. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. It's and I can tell you, I had a personal experience. I was very fortunate when I went to my Jesuit school. I had a professor of math who made me really fall in love with mathematics. First initiation into mathematics. Tell us as students, if you want the key to help you unlock the doors to reveal the mysteries of this universe, mathematics is the key, and I'm here to help you appreciate it. That automatically set me on a different way of approaching math. I studied abstract algebra, I studied number theory as a result before getting into politics, international affairs, and conflict management and all the other stuff. Great foundation. Geometry, yes. Geometry is the basis of all sciences in a way. Without geometry, without math, as we say, all the other physical sciences really get us nowhere. Yet it is founded on, like we said, axioms that we have proved that we cannot prove to be right, but we must accept as being so. It is an intuition. And that is where the word of faith, enlightened faith, comes in versus blind faith. So absolutely, and that is why geometry is the most important for the Mason to study, to appreciate. Not neglecting the others, but it is at the heart of everything, because it is the one that helps us bring the two. Now, once you see it, then you jump to music. Then you jump to astronomy. It starts making sense, because with music, you can understand now how the numbers and the magic beauty of the notes, together, math and numbers, and then you get to astronomy, and you really get into the depth, the scientific knowledge of this universe, what makes it work, not just beyond the earth, the entire universe. But then it helps, geometry helps prepare you for appreciating the beauty and understanding the harmony that exists in this universe, which is all coming from love. So
And you said that geometry is a feminine quality as well.
it is.
So in what sense?
Where does the creative part come from? Is it from the male or the feminine? It's an interesting issue of debate, isn't it? The male is the masculine causes something to be done, but it is the feminine that nurtures the creation. Without the feminine, there's no creation. So there's a creative agent or a catalyst, but you need the nurturing environment, that is the feminine. So call it the womb, call it whatever you want, but the feminine is really where everything gets nurtured. Both are needed.
And then finally, let's come back to this one quote here where John says, I think that love is the core energy that rules everything. It is the force field out of the electronic field of creation. Love is the one ingredient that holds us together. So love is as a core energy. Is that a Masonic philosophy at all?
It's a creative force. Love is the way you understand really the deity. That's supreme intelligence. And it is neither feminine nor masculine. It is both. The feminine and the masculine emerge from it.
So Freemasonry is essentially based on this idea of a monistic cosmos. It's all one, which fits very well with science. It's not it's dualistic when you get down to the material world and the forces within the material world, but ultimately everything is one. So do you think that's one of the encouragements for science being included in Masonic ritual?
There are many ways for the individual to reconnect with the oneness. But in the physical world in which we live, the pursuit of science, enlightened science, is definitely one very important way for the individual to reconnect with the oneness. We're here at the Albert Einstein Monument, located in front of the National Academy of Sciences along Constitution Avenue. What powerful symbolism. The Constitution of the United States separated church and state in order to make sure that government would not rely on religion to govern the affairs of the people in this great experiment, but rather would rely on enlightened reason, science, the scientific method to govern the affairs of the people. Einstein believed that enlightened science was necessary to help advance the human condition. He truly believed in that humanity. The legend goes that when Albert Einstein emigrated to the United States from his country of birth, Germany, fleeing tyranny in his homeland, and when asked for census reasons to pick which race he belonged to, Einstein handwrote human race. Now, Albert Einstein believed also there was a direct connection between what happens here down on Earth and the universe of worlds that exist above. Above as below, below as above. And it is for that reason that on the grounds of this monument, you see the constellations on display, commemorating the day, the hour in which this monument was dedicated. Of special importance and notice to us is right here, the Orion constellation. Interestingly enough, also on display in the hologram at the Fetzer Institute. Now that is quite interesting because Orion is mentioned very prominently and importantly in the rituals of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. It is all about the mystery schools to help us understand what do we mean by enlightened science, enlightened knowledge to create the true community of freedom. It is also important to remember that Albert Einstein believed in the concept of enlightened science. Without enlightenment, Science in and of itself cannot improve the human condition. If we take a look here at the portal above the main doors to the building of the National Academy of Sciences, we interestingly see a solar disk. Now, the solar disk here symbolically represents enlightenment. And the idea behind that is that we need enlightened science in order to achieve wisdom, to guide us in everything we do to advance the human condition. And we see the symbol of wisdom on the right and left with the two owls. And interestingly enough, one owl looking east and the other one facing west. And that is to remind us that wisdom comes from the east to the west as well as from the west to the east. There is no one source for wisdom. However, it is enlightenment that will help us be wise in exercising the use of science in order to achieve true freedom. Otherwise, we fall into slavery. So it is enlightened science that helps us build the true community of freedom. Now, in a cathedral, one would typically find beautiful stained glass windows that have to do with the story life of Jesus Christ, disciples in Christianity. Here in this national cathedral, being symbolically a temple for the spiritual foundation of the great experiment, one finds stained glass windows having to do with Christianity, but also windows depicting various aspects of the evolution and phases of the evolution of the great experiment. But immediately behind me, you see two unique windows. One depicting the spiritual foundation of the great experiment with the implements of Freemasonry laid throughout that window. And next to it, the space window, which is dedicated to science and scientific discovery. And that is to say that both spirituality and science need to come together. They are necessary for the success and the continuous success of this great experiment that we call America. If you take a look at the Masonic window, you're going to see panels, and if you look at the central panel all the way at the bottom, you'll see King Solomon seated, and flanking him the two columns that one sees typically always in a Masonic lodge. If you take another example at the far left lower panel, you see implements, tools used in Freemasonry like the gavel and the chisel. On the right-hand side, you see compasses and square and the equilateral triangle. If you take a look now at the space window, there are a couple of items that I'd like to highlight. You have the sun and the moon. Up at the top end of the window, you see a large circle. This is representing, the sun. And in the middle, in the center, you will see a small dark object surrounded by a white circle. Now, that object is actually a piece of rock that the astronauts brought with them from the moon and was put in that window. And of course, we see the moon below on the lower right side. And the idea of the sun and the moon, of course, for our universe, but esoterically also talking about the feminine and the masculine in the concept of divinity from a spiritual perspective. So of course, the sun and the moon being the two key objects that you see depicted in the space window, not only because they're central to our life here down on Earth, but from an esoteric perspective, that has also to do with the masculine and the feminine aspects of the creation the divinity expressing itself in all ways, with the sacred feminine as well as the masculine power, and the idea of diffusing energy and at the same time being receptive of energy. That diffusion and reception is so important to harmony in the universe, and therefore, since it is above as below, below as above, that same harmony is so necessary for us and our life down here on earth. How we humans relate to one another should be also based on the concept of diffusing energy and also receiving and be receptive of that, not to use energy to control others or to subject others to one's whims, but to diffuse light to others.